My name is Henriette, and I'm 32 years old. I've been married to Robert from the wealthy Blackwell family for 5 years. I never imagined I would have to make the hardest decision of my life during Thanksgiving dinner. The room fell completely silent when my mother-in-law Martha looked directly at me and declared, "You've never had a place in this family and never will." In that painful moment, I found a strength and dignity I didn't know I possessed. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to walk away from toxic family situations, and stick around to hear how I found the courage to choose myself when it mattered most. I grew up in a small town in Connecticut, raised by a single mother who worked multiple jobs to provide for us. We never had much money, but we had love and determination in abundance. My mother taught me the value of hard work, kindness, and standing up for myself. Those lessons would prove invaluable later in my life, though I couldn't have known it then. Art was my escape and passion from an early age. I would spend hours sketching and painting, eventually earning a scholarship to study fine arts in college. After graduation, I became an art teacher at a local high school, finding joy in nurturing creativity in young minds. My life was simple but fulfilling. I met Robert at an art gallery fundraiser 7 years ago. I was there representing my school's art program, hoping to secure donations for supplies. Robert was attending as part of his family's philanthropic obligations. He stood out immediately, not just because of his tailored suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary, but because of the genuine interest he showed in the student artwork on display. "You must be very proud of them," he said, examining a student's painting with real appreciation. "I am," I replied. "They create with such honesty." We spent the entire evening talking about art education and our vastly different upbringings. Robert came from old money. The Blackwells owned a large manufacturing company that had been in the family for generations. They had connections to politicians, celebrities, and other influential families. It was a world completely foreign to me. Despite our differences, we connected on a fundamental level. Robert had a warmth and humility that seemed at odds with his privileged background. He laughed easily and listened intently. By the end of the night, we had exchanged numbers, and I found myself hoping he would call. He did call the very next day, and our relationship progressed quickly. Robert was different from anyone I had ever dated. He was thoughtful, generous, without being showy, and genuinely interested in my work and passions. Within 6 months, we were in love. Meeting his family was inevitable, though I approached it with trepidation. Robert assured me they would love me as much as he did, but I wasn't convinced. The first dinner at the Blackwell estate was intimidating. The house was more like a museum than a home, with priceless artwork and antiques in every room. Robert's father, William, greeted me with surprising warmth. He was a tall, distinguished man with Robert's kind eyes and a firm handshake. "So you're the art teacher who's stolen my son's heart," he said with a genuine smile. "He hasn't stopped talking about you." Martha Blackwell, however, was a different story entirely. From the moment she laid eyes on me, I could sense her disapproval. She was immaculately dressed and coiffed, her smile never reaching her eyes as she assessed me. "Henriette," she said, pronouncing my name as if it tasted bitter. "What an unusual name." "It was my grandmother's," I explained, trying to keep my voice steady. "How quaint," she replied before turning her attention back to Robert. "Darling, the Hendersons were asking about you at the club. Their daughter Victoria is back from Europe." That first meeting set the tone for my relationship with Martha. While never openly hostile, she made her feelings clear through subtle comments about my background, education, and manners. "Oh, you went to State University, how accessible," or "I suppose teaching is rewarding even if the compensation is minimal." Robert would gently admonish her, "Mom, be nice," but he always framed her behaviour as just her way, and assured me that she'll warm up eventually. I wanted to believe him, so I nodded and smiled and tried harder to win her approval. Our wedding was a lavish affair, planned almost entirely by Martha. I had dreamed of a small, intimate ceremony, but that was quickly dismissed as inappropriate for a Blackwell. Martha controlled everything from the guest list, mostly people I had never met, to my dress, which she insisted had to come from a specific designer. Throughout the planning process, I was made to feel like an accessory rather than the bride. "The Blackwell wedding traditions go back generations," Martha would say whenever I suggested something different. "We have certain standards to maintain." On what should have been the happiest day of my life, I felt like an outsider at my own wedding. Martha paraded me around to her friends like a curiosity. "Henriette is an art teacher." She would say, the subtext clear. "This is not who we would have chosen for our son." After the wedding, I threw myself into becoming the kind of wife Martha might approve of. I took etiquette classes and secret-studied wine and art history, even changed my wardrobe to better match the conservative Blackwell aesthetic. I thought if I could just become more like them, Martha would accept me. But no matter what I did, it was never enough. Martha found ways to exclude me from family traditions and decisions. Holiday decorations were done the Blackwell way, with no room for my input. Family vacations were planned without consulting me. Even my birthday was acknowledged only with a generic card and gift certificate, nothing personal or thoughtful. Through it all, Robert continued to make excuses for his mother, rather than standing up for me. That's just how she is with everyone, he would say, though I could clearly see it wasn't true. She warmly embraced Robert's friends, colleagues, and extended family. It was only me she held at arm's length. I began to realize that Robert had been conditioned his entire life to placate his mother. He was a dutiful son who had rarely, if ever, defied her wishes. While he loved me deeply, he lacked the tools or courage to confront the growing tension between his wife and mother. 3 years into our marriage, Robert and I purchased our first home. It was a modest but charming colonial with a beautiful garden and a small studio space where I could paint. We fell in love with it, immediately envisioning our future there. Family dinners in the cozy dining room, children playing in the backyard holidays filled with warmth and laughter. Martha's reaction was predictably disapproving. "It's in such an interesting neighborhood," she said. During her first visit, her expression suggesting she'd smelled something unpleasant. "I expected you to choose something in Westbrook Estates, where the right sort of families live." "We love this house, Mom," Robert said, his arm around my waist. "It has character." "Character is what people say when they can't afford quality," Martha replied with a thin smile. After that, Martha's backhanded compliments and exclusionary behavior became more frequent and less subtle. At family gatherings, she would reminisce about events that had occurred before I joined the family, rarely bothering to provide context or include me in the conversation. "Remember that Christmas in Aspen?" she would ask, launching into a detailed story while I sat silently unable to contribute. She would arrange family photos and conveniently forget to include me. "Oh, Henriette, would you mind taking the picture? We need a Blackwell family portrait for the Christmas card." Each slight cut deeper than the last, but I continued to smile and endure, not wanting to create conflict between Robert and his mother. I loved him too much to force him to choose, even as I began to realize that his inability to stand up to Martha was eroding something essential in our relationship. 4 years into our marriage, I discovered I was pregnant. The joy Robert and I felt was overwhelming. After years of trying and several disappointments, we were finally going to be parents. We shared the news with my mother first, who burst into tears of happiness and immediately began planning a trip to visit. Telling Martha and William was a different experience entirely. William was genuinely delighted, pulling me into a warm hug and whispering, "You've made our family richer in all the ways that matter." Martha, however, offered a tight smile and a perfunctory congratulations. Later, when Robert left the room, she cornered me in the kitchen. "I do hope you're prepared for the responsibility," she said, her voice low. "Raising a Blackwell requires certain standards. I wonder if you're really fit for the task." Her words stung, but I was determined to not let her spoil my happiness. "I may not be a Blackwell by birth," I replied, "but I will love this child with everything I have, and that's what matters most." Martha's eyes narrowed. "Love is lovely, dear, but it doesn't prepare a child for the world they'll inherit. There are traditions, expectations, things you simply wouldn't understand." As my pregnancy progressed, Robert began to notice his mother's behavior more acutely. The protectiveness he felt toward our unborn child extended somewhat to me, and he occasionally pushed back against Martha's more blatant criticisms. "Mom, that's enough," he said when she questioned my decision to continue teaching until my maternity leave. "Henriette knows what's best for herself and the baby." These small defences gave me hope that things might be changing, that Robert was finally seeing the damage his mother's behaviour was causing. But they were inconsistent, and he still often minimised the impact of her words. "She's just anxious about becoming a grandmother," he would say. "She wants everything to be perfect." As the weeks passed, I found myself growing increasingly resentful and isolated within the Blackwell family. What should have been a joyful time was overshadowed by Martha's constant interference and criticism. She insisted on accompanying us to doctor's appointments, questioned every decision we made about the nursery, and even began purchasing baby clothes and equipment without consulting us. All in the Blackwell family style, of course. Then at 12 weeks, the unthinkable happened. I began experiencing cramping and bleeding while teaching my afternoon art class. By the time Robert met me at the hospital, it was too late. We had lost our baby. The grief was overwhelming. Robert and I clung to each other, united in our sorrow. For a brief time, nothing else mattered. Not Martha's disapproval, not the tensions in our marriage, just our shared loss and love. Martha's response to our miscarriage was the most revealing and hurtful moment of our relationship to that point. When we shared the news, she patted my hand awkwardly and said, "Perhaps it's for the best. First pregnancies are often problematic. The next one will be stronger, I'm sure." Robert was too consumed by his own grief to register the callousness of his mother's response, but it cut me to my core. In that moment, I understood that Martha would never see me as family, never value my feelings or experiences. To her, I was simply a vessel for continuing the Blackwell line, and I had failed at even that. In the weeks that followed, I withdrew emotionally both from the Blackwells and increasingly from Robert. I returned to teaching perhaps too quickly, throwing myself into my work as a distraction from the emptiness I felt at home. Robert and I moved around each other like ghosts, our once vibrant connection dimmed by grief and unspoken resentments. I began to wonder if our marriage could survive, not just the loss of our child, but the toxic dynamics that had been eroding our foundation from the beginning. I loved Robert deeply, but I was starting to understand that love alone wasn't enough to heal the growing divide between us. Thanksgiving arrived with a chill in the air and a sense of dread in my heart. The annual dinner at the Blackwell estate was always an elaborate affair, steeped in tradition and formality. Under normal circumstances, it was challenging. This year, still raw from our loss, it felt nearly impossible. "We don't have to go," Robert suggested, the night before watching me try on and discard outfit after outfit. Nothing seemed right. Everything either reminded me of last Thanksgiving when we didn't yet know I was pregnant, or felt like a costume I was donning to play the role of the perfect Blackwell wife. "Your mother would never forgive us," I replied, settling on a burgundy dress that Martha had once complimented. "Besides, maybe it will be good to be around family." The irony of my statement wasn't lost on me. The Blackwells had never truly felt like my family, yet here I was preparing to break bread with them, rather than spending the holiday with my mother, who had offered to fly in from Arizona. I spent hours getting ready, applying makeup to hide the shadows under my eyes, styling my hair just so even practicing my smile in the mirror. The effort was exhausting, but necessary. I knew that any perceived imperfection would be noted and likely commented on by Martha. We arrived at the Blackwell estate precisely on time. Being early would be presumptuous, being late disrespectful according to Martha's unwritten rules. The house was decorated impeccably for the occasion, with arrangements of fall flowers and gourds, fine china, and crystal gleaming on the dining table. Robert's sister Emma and her husband were already there, along with several cousins and of course William and Martha. Emma greeted me warmly. Of all the Blackwells, she had been the most consistently kind, perhaps because she understood what it was like to marry into the family rather than be born into it. "You look beautiful, Henriette," she said, embracing me. "How are you holding up?" Before I could answer, Martha swept in resplendent in designer clothes and family heirlooms. "Emma, darling, the Thompsons have arrived. You must come say hello. They've been asking about you." Just like that, I was alone again, Robert having been pulled into conversation with his father and cousins. I made my way to the bar and requested a sparkling water not yet ready to dull my senses with alcohol. I would need my wits about me to navigate the evening. Dinner itself was a masterpiece of culinary expertise and social choreography. Martha had arranged the seating to separate Robert and me, placing him near the head of the table beside his father, while I was relegated to the middle between a distant cousin and Emma's husband. The conversation flowed around me, touching on business deals, country club gossip, and family anecdotes that predated my arrival in their lives. I smiled and nodded at appropriate intervals, offering brief comments when directly addressed, but largely remaining on the periphery. It wasn't until dessert was served that the topic shifted to family legacy and future generations. William raised his glass in a toast to his eldest nephew, who had recently announced his wife's pregnancy. "To new Blackwells," William said warmly. "May the family continue to grow and prosper for generations to come." Everyone clinked glasses and murmured agreement. I took a small sip of my water, fighting the lump forming in my throat. Robert caught my eye from across the table, his expression a mixture of sorrow and apology. Martha, however, seemed oblivious to our discomfort. "Family legacy is everything," she declared. "The Blackwell name means something in this community, in this country, It's our responsibility to ensure it continues with the right kind of additions. Her gaze swept meaningfully around the table, lingering briefly but pointedly on me. The implication was clear. I was not the right kind of addition. Something shifted inside me then. Perhaps it was grief, perhaps accumulated resentment, or perhaps simply fatigue with pretending. Whatever the cause, I found myself speaking up. Robert and I hope to try again for a baby in the spring. I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. We're still healing, but we very much want to start a family. The table fell silent. This was not the kind of personal information typically shared at a Blackwell gathering where emotions were considered private and messy. Martha's lips thinned to a nearly invisible line. Well, she said after a pause that stretched too long, let's hope things go better next time, though I wonder if perhaps you might consider cutting back on your work. Teaching is so demanding and clearly your body couldn't handle the strain. My doctor said the miscarriage had nothing to do with my job, I replied, feeling heat rise to my cheeks. These things just happen sometimes. Martha's expression hardened. In my day, women prioritized family over career. The Blackwell women have always understood that their primary duty is to the family name. I'm not a Blackwell woman by birth, I pointed out. I have my own name, my own identity. The tension around the table was palpable now. William cleared his throat uncomfortably. Emma studied her plate with sudden interest. Robert shifted in his seat but remained silent. Martha's eyes flashed with something dangerous. Perhaps that's the problem, she said, her voice cold and clear. You've never had a place in this family and never will. My son made a mistake marrying you. The words hung in the air like poison. No one moved. No one spoke. Robert's face had gone pale, his eyes wide with shock, but still he said nothing. Mom, he finally managed, his voice weak. That's not appropriate right now. Not appropriate right now. Not that's not true, or apologize to my wife. Just not right now, as if there might be a more appropriate time to tell me I didn't belong in my own marriage. In that moment, I saw with perfect clarity what the rest of my life would look like if nothing changed. Years of subtle and not so subtle humiliation. A husband who would never truly stand up for me. Children caught in the middle of a toxic power struggle. I placed my napkin carefully on the table and stood up. Every eye turned to me, expressions ranging from embarrassment to curiosity to Martha's barely concealed triumph. Thank you for dinner, I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside me. I think it's best if I leave now. With as much dignity as I could muster, I walked out of the dining room through the grand foyer and out into the cold November night. I didn't look back, didn't wait for Robert, didn't cry until I was safely in my car and driving away from the Blackwell estate. Only then did I allow the tears to come streaming down my face as I realized I had just walked away from not only a Thanksgiving dinner, but possibly my marriage as well. The drive home was a blur of tears and swirling thoughts. I kept replaying Martha's words in my head, along with Robert's tepid response. Not appropriate right now. After 5 years of marriage, that was all the defense he could muster. I arrived at our house, the home we had chosen together, the place where we had planned to build our family. And it suddenly felt foreign, as if I was seeing it through Martha's critical eyes rather than my own. Would anything ever truly be mine in this marriage? Or would I always be an outsider, looking in on the Blackwell world? Inside, I kicked off my heels and washed the makeup from my face, watching as the carefully constructed facade of the perfect Blackwell wife disappeared down the drain. I changed into comfortable clothes, made a cup of tea, and waited for Robert to come home. Hours passed. My phone buzzed occasionally, with text messages from Emma, expressing concern and apologizing for her mother's behavior. Nothing from Robert. The longer I waited, the clearer it became that he had chosen to stay with his family rather than follow his wife home after such a devastating public humiliation. It was nearly midnight when I heard his key in the lock. Robert entered cautiously, as if expecting a confrontation. He looked exhausted, his tie loosened his shoulders, slumped. Henriette? He began, his voice a mixture of guilt and defensiveness. I'm sorry about what happened. Are you? I asked quietly. Which part exactly are you sorry for? Your mother saying I don't belong in your family, or you sitting there and letting her say it? Robert ran a hand through his hair. You know how she gets, especially at holidays. She had too much wine, she didn't mean it the way it sounded. The excuses were so familiar, so predictable, that they almost made me laugh. She meant exactly what she said, Robert. She's meant it from the day we met. The only difference is that tonight she finally said it out loud. You're overreacting, he said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. Mom is difficult, I know that, but she's still family. And what am I? I demanded, my voice rising, despite my efforts to stay calm. Am I family, Robert? Because for 5 years, I've been treated like an unwelcome guest in your life. I've changed the way I dress, the way I speak, the way I behave. I've swallowed every criticism endured, every slight made excuses for inexcusable behavior. And still, it's not enough. It will never be enough. The dam broke, then years of accumulated pain and resentment pouring out. I told him everything. How each of Martha's comments had cut me down, how his failure to defend me had made me feel abandoned, how alone I had felt even in a room full of Blackwells. Do you have any idea what it's like, I asked, tears streaming down my face, to lose our baby and have your mother tell me it was for the best, to have no one, not even my husband, acknowledge how deeply that hurt me? Robert's defensiveness crumbled as the full weight of my words hit him. He sank onto the sofa, head in his hands. I didn't know she said that, he whispered. Why didn't you tell me? Would it have mattered? Would you have confronted her? Or would you have told me she didn't mean it, that she just doesn't express emotions well, that I should try to understand her better? His silence was answer enough. I can't do this anymore, Robert, I said, suddenly exhausted. I can't pretend that your mother's behavior isn't destroying me, destroying us. Either we get counseling and you set real boundaries with her, or I'm leaving. Robert looked up, alarm replacing the guilt on his face. Leaving, Henriette? You don't mean that. We can work this out. I'll talk to Mom, I'll make her understand. That's not enough anymore, I replied. This isn't just about your mother. It's about us, about the fact that after 5 years of marriage, you still can't choose me over her. You still can't stand up and say, don't speak to my wife that way. I went upstairs and packed a bag with enough clothes for a few days. When I came back down, Robert was still sitting on the sofa looking shell-shocked. Where are you going, sir? He asked, his voice small. To Diane's, I replied, naming my closest friend. I need some time to think, to figure out what I want. Please don't go, he said, rising to his feet. It's Thanksgiving. We should be together. The irony of his statement wasn't lost on me. We should have been together at dinner tonight, I pointed out. But when I walked out, you stayed behind. As I headed for the door, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Martha. I'm sorry if you misinterpreted my concerns about our family traditions. It was not my intention to upset you. I showed the message to Robert. This is not an apology, I said quietly. This is your mother doing what she always does, making it clear that the problem is me, not her. Robert looked pained, but offered no defense. With a sigh, I picked up my bag and walked out the door, unsure if I would ever return. Diane welcomed me with open arms and no questions, at least not immediately. She had been my friend since before I met Robert and had witnessed firsthand the slow erosion of my confidence and identity throughout my marriage. The guest room is all yours for as long as you need it, she said, taking my bag and leading me inside her cozy apartment. And when you're ready to talk, I'm here. What had initially been planned as a few days at Diane's stretched into a full week. Robert's texts and calls came in a constant stream, alternating between apologies, pleas for me to come home, and occasional flashes of frustration that I was making such a big deal out of the situation. I responded sparingly, needing the distance to sort through my tangled emotions. For the first time in years, I was thinking clearly about my marriage, about what I wanted and needed, without the suffocating pressure of the Blackwell expectations. Diane proved to be not just a sympathetic ear, but a mirror that reflected truths I had been avoiding. You've been disappearing, she told me one evening as we shared a bottle of wine. The Henriette I knew, the one who was passionate about art and teaching, who spoke her mind and laughed without worrying who was watching, she's been fading away a little more each year. Her words stung because they were true. I had been so focused on becoming the person Martha might accept that I had lost sight of who I actually was. My mother flew in from Arizona on the Sunday after Thanksgiving, insisting on seeing me despite my assurances that I was fine. She took one look at me and pulled me into a fierce hug. My brave girl, she whispered. I'm so sorry you've been going through this alone. Over the next few days, my mother and I had the kind of honest conversations we should have had years ago. She confessed that she had always been concerned about the dynamics with Martha, but hadn't wanted to interfere in my marriage. I raised you to stand on your own 2 feet, she said, as we walked through a local park, bundled against the December chill. To know your own worth and not accept mistreatment from anyone. But I also raised you to be kind and to try to see the best in people. I think maybe you've been trying so hard to be kind that you forgot to be kind to yourself. Her words resonated deeply. I had been so determined to make my marriage work to prove Martha wrong about me that I had allowed fundamental parts of myself to be diminished in the process. With my mother's encouragement, I started therapy, finding a counselor who specialized in family dynamics and setting healthy boundaries. Those initial sessions were painful but clarifying, helping me understand that the problem had never been my worthiness, but rather Martha's need for control and Robert's inability to establish boundaries with his mother. Meanwhile, Robert's initial anger at my continued absence had given way to something like desperation. His texts became more reflective, acknowledging for the first time the pattern of behavior I had been pointing out for years. "I've been thinking about what you said," he wrote on day 10 of our separation, "about me never standing up to my mother. You're right. I've always taken the path of least resistance with her. It wasn't fair to you, and I'm truly sorry." As meaningful as his words were, I needed more than text message apologies to heal the breach between us. I continued my therapy sessions, reconnected with friends I had neglected, and even pulled out my old sketchbooks, rediscovering the joy of creating art without worrying about whether it was sophisticated enough for Blackwell tastes. Nearly 2 weeks into our separation, I received an unexpected phone call from Emma, Robert's sister. "Can we meet for coffee, Bus?" she asked. "There are some things I think you should know." We met at a small cafe far from the Blackwell usual haunts. Emma looked nervous, but determined as she stirred her latte. "First, Fire," she said, "I want to apologise for not speaking up at Thanksgiving. What Mum said was inexcusable, and we all should have called her out on it. I appreciated her honesty, but was curious about why she had reached out now." "Thank you," I said, "but I get the feeling that's not the only reason you wanted to meet." Emma nodded. "You need to understand something about my mother. What she did to you, the criticism, the exclusion, the control, she does it to everyone who threatens her position in the family. You're not the first, and you won't be the last unless someone finally stands up to her." Over the next hour, Emma shared stories I had never heard before. About other relationships Martha had sabotaged, including Emma's own marriage initially. "Jake wasn't from the right background according to Mom," she explained. "She did everything she could to break us up. The only reason we survived is that Jake has a spine of steel, and I finally chose him over her approval." Emma's revelations helped me see that the problem had never been about me being good enough for the Blackwells. It was about Martha's pathological need to control her children's lives and her inability to accept anyone who might challenge that control. "Robert has always had it the worst," Emma confided. "As the only son, the heir to the Blackwell name, Mum has had him under her thumb since he was born. He's never learned how to stand up to her the way I eventually did." While this insight didn't excuse Robert's behaviour, it helped me understand it better. He wasn't weak so much as conditioned, trained from childhood to seek his mother's approval above all else. As I drove home from my meeting with Emma, I found myself passing by our local art supply store. On impulse, I stopped in and purchased a new sketchbook and set of charcoals. That night in Diane's guest room, I began to draw for the first time in months. Not calculated, technically perfect pieces that might impress the Blackwell art collectors, but raw emotional images that expressed my pain, confusion, and growing sense of personal strength. Looking at the finished drawings, I had a moment of clarity whether or not my marriage survived. I needed to reclaim myself first. I couldn't make healthy decisions about my future while still defining my worth, yes, through Martha's eyes or even Robert's. I had to remember who Henriette was before she became a Blackwell. After 2 weeks of separation, Robert asked to meet. "Not at home," he specified in his text. "Somewhere neutral, the park by the lake maybe." I agreed, suggesting the bench where we used to sit in the early days of our relationship, watching the sunset over the water. It seemed fitting to have this conversation in a place that held memories of who we had been before the Blackwell expectations had begun to change us both. When I arrived, Robert was already there, sitting hunched against the December cold. He looked different, unshaven with dark circles under his eyes, his usually immaculate appearance decidedly rumpled. He stood when he saw me, uncertainty written across his face. "Thank you for coming," he said as I sat beside him, leaving a careful space between us. "You look tired," I observed, resisting the instinct to reach out and smooth his hair. Robert gave a humorless laugh. "I haven't been sleeping well, or eating much. Turns out our bed feels enormous without you in it." We sat in silence for a moment, watching a pair of ducks glide across the lake surface. There had been a time when silences between us were comfortable, intimate even. Now this one felt loaded with all the words we had never said to each other. "I've started therapy," Robert said, finally, his voice quiet but steady. "Individual sessions twice a week. I should have done it years ago. The admission surprised me. Robert had always been resistant to the idea of therapy, viewing it as something for other people with real problems. That's good, I said cautiously. I've been seeing someone too. Robert nodded. I know I've let you down, Henriette. Not just at Thanksgiving, but for our entire marriage. I've been so conditioned to keep the peace with my mother that I failed to protect the person who matters most to me. His words touched me, but I needed more than pretty phrases. What's different now, Robert? Why should I believe things will change? He took a deep breath. I had a long talk with my father after you left. I've never seen him so angry, not at you, but at Mum and at me. He said he's watched this pattern his entire marriage, Mum pushing people away who threaten her control, and he regrets never putting a stop to it. This revelation surprised me. William had always seemed so strong in some ways, yet he too had failed to set boundaries with Martha. Dad told me something I never knew, Robert continued. When we were kids, his brother, my Uncle James, stopped speaking to the family because of how Mum treated his wife. They reconciled only a few years ago after decades of estrangement. Dad said he doesn't want that for us, doesn't want me to lose everything that matters because I can't stand up to my mother. Robert turned to face me directly. I'm not making excuses, Henriette. I failed you repeatedly, but I'm committed to changing to being the husband you deserve. I've realized that I've been so afraid of losing my mother's approval that I was willing to risk losing my wife's love. And that's unforgivable. I studied his face looking for signs of the old Robert, the one who would make promises in the moment, but return to patterns of appeasement when confronted with his mother's disapproval. What I saw instead was something new, a determination, a clarity I hadn't seen before. I want to believe you, I said honestly, but I need more than words, Robert. I need to see real change. I know, he replied. That's why I'm suggesting we continue living separately while we work on ourselves and our relationship. We can start couples counseling, set clear goals and boundaries. I need to prove to you that I can be the partner you thought you were marrying. His suggestion surprised me. It would have been easier for him to beg me to come home, to promise that everything would be different without doing the actual work of change. The fact that he was proposing a more measured approach gave me hope that perhaps this time was different. There's something else you should know, Robert added. I've cancelled Christmas at the Blackwell estate. My eyes widened in shock. The Blackwell Christmas celebration was sacrosanct, an elaborate multi-day affair that had been conducted the same way for generations. For Robert to cancel it was nothing short of revolutionary. Mum called when she found out. He continued, a small smile playing at his lips. She was furious, demanded I reconsider, said I was destroying family traditions. And for the first time in my life, I stood my ground. I told her that until she could sincerely apologize to you and commit to treating you with respect, things between us would remain distant. How did she take that? I asked, unable to imagine Martha accepting such an ultimatum. About as well as you'd expect, Robert replied with a wry smile. There were tears, accusations, even a claim that she was feeling faint and might need to go to the hospital. All the usual tactics. But this time they didn't work. I just calmly repeated my position and ended the call when she wouldn't listen. The Robert sitting beside me now was different from the man who had muttered, "Not appropriate right now," at the Thanksgiving table. There was a newfound steadiness to him, a willingness to face conflict rather than avoid it at all costs. I can't promise it will be easy, he said, reaching for my hand but stopping short of touching me. Changing patterns that have been in place for decades takes time. But I can promise that I'm committed to doing the work to putting our relationship first. As we left the park, we didn't hold hands or embrace. There was too much still unresolved between us. But we walked side by side, matched in pace, if not yet fully reunited in purpose. It was a beginning. Tentative, fragile, but real. The next 3 months were among the most challenging and transformative of my life. Robert and I both committed fully to our individual therapy sessions, exploring the patterns and beliefs that had shaped our behavior. We also began couples counseling, learning to communicate more honestly and directly about our needs and boundaries. I remained at Diane's apartment, needing the continued space to rediscover myself outside of the Blackwell influence. I resumed painting seriously for the first time since early in our marriage, even renting a small studio space where I could work on larger canvases. I also began teaching community art classes at the local cultural centre, finding joy in sharing my passion with others who created art simply for the love of it, not for status or display. Robert, true to his word, maintained the boundaries he had established with his mother. It wasn't easy. Martha employed every manipulation tactic in her considerable arsenal. There were tearful phone calls, claims of illness, flying monkeys, in the form of family friends who reached out to express concern about the family rift, and even a surprise visit to Robert's office. She showed up with lunch acting as if nothing had happened, Robert told me during one of our weekly dinner dates. When I reminded her that I had been clear about my expectations, she claimed she had no idea what I was talking about and that I was being cruel to her. In the past, such tactics would have worked. Robert would have capitulated, telling himself it was easier to give in than to maintain the conflict. But therapy was giving him tools to recognize and resist these patterns. I told her that I loved her, but that our relationship would remain limited until she could acknowledge the harm she had caused and commit to changing her behavior, he explained. Then I walked her to the elevator and went back to work. Robert's father, William, became an unexpected ally in this process, having finally acknowledged his own role in enabling Martha's behavior over the decades he was now working to establish healthier dynamics in their marriage as well. Dad told Mum that he supports my position completely, Robert shared. That's never happened before, them being on opposite sides of a family issue. I think it's been a wake-up call for her, realizing that she can't automatically count on everyone falling in line anymore. As for Martha herself, her initial resistance to change was fierce. But as weeks passed with Robert maintaining his position, small cracks began to appear in her armor. The realization that her son was serious, that this wasn't a temporary rebellion, but a fundamental shift in their relationship, gradually sank in. She started seeing a therapist too, Robert told me with evident surprise. Dad insisted, said it was that, or accept that her relationship with me would never be the same. I don't know how committed she is to the process, but it's more than I ever expected. After 2 months of separate living and intensive therapy, Robert and I agreed it was time to address the Martha situation directly. With the guidance of our therapist, we arranged a supervised meeting at the counsellor's office, neutral territory where the established patterns would be harder to maintain. Martha arrived looking immaculate as always, but there was a new fragility to her that I hadn't seen before. The confident, controlling woman who had dominated the Blackwell family for decades seemed diminished, somehow uncertain in this unfamiliar setting. The session was difficult, emotional, and at times incredibly tense. Martha initially tried to minimize her behavior, casting herself as a misunderstood mother-in-law who only wanted the best for her family. But with the therapist's skilled guidance and Robert's gentle but firm insistence on honesty, she eventually began to acknowledge some hard truths. I was afraid, she admitted finally, her voice small. Afraid of losing my place in Robert's life, afraid of change, afraid of becoming irrelevant. It wasn't about you personally, Henriette. It was about what you represented. A shift in the family dynamic that I wasn't ready to accept. It wasn't a complete transformation, and I harbored no illusions that one therapy session would undo decades of entrenched behavior. But it was a start, a crack in the facade that might eventually lead to genuine change. I can't promise I'll always get it right, Martha said as the session concluded. But I am trying to understand how my actions have affected you both, and I apologize for the pain I've caused. The words seemed to cost her greatly, and I suspected they were at least partly performance for Robert's benefit. But the fact that she had said them at all represented progress I wouldn't have thought possible months earlier. As winter gave way to spring, Robert and I continued our careful rebuilding process. The foundation of our relationship was stronger now, fortified by honest communication and mutual respect that had been missing before. We spent time together, not just in therapy, but in rediscovering the connection that had brought us together initially. Our shared love of art, meaningful conversation, and simple pleasures like walking by the lake or cooking dinner together. The decision to reconcile fully wasn't made in a single dramatic moment, but through a series of small choices and realizations. I came to understand that Robert's failure to stand up to his mother hadn't been a reflection of how much he loved me, but of deep-seated patterns established long before I entered his life. And while that didn't excuse his behavior, it helped me contextualize it and recognize the courage it took for him to finally break those patterns. For his part, Robert demonstrated his commitment to change, not through grand gestures, but through consistent daily choices that prioritized our relationship and respected my boundaries. He never pressured me to resume living together before I was ready, focusing instead on proving through actions that the changes he was making were genuine and lasting. When I finally did move back into our home, it was with clearly established boundaries regarding Martha's role in our lives. She would not have unfettered access to our home or our time. Visits would be planned in advance and limited in duration. Most importantly, any return to her previous pattern of criticism or exclusion would result in an immediate end to the interaction. These boundaries weren't punitive but protective, creating the safe space necessary for all of us to develop healthier relationships. To my surprise, Martha largely respected them, perhaps recognizing that the alternative was an even more limited role in her son's life. 1 year after that fateful Thanksgiving dinner, we hosted a small gathering at our home. It was nothing like the elaborate Blackwell affairs of the past. Just a simple meal with the people who had supported us through this difficult journey: Robert's father, William, his sister, Emma, and her husband, my mother, who had flown in from Arizona, and my friend Diane, who had provided sanctuary when I needed it most. Martha was not present. Not because she wasn't invited, but because she had declined the invitation. "I don't think I'm ready for that yet," she had told Robert with unusual self-awareness. "Maybe next time." Her absence wasn't a failure, but a recognition of the current reality of our relationships. We were all still healing, still learning how to interact in healthier ways. Forcing a premature reunion would have served no one well. As I looked around our dining table at the faces of people who truly cared for us, I felt a profound sense of peace. The journey had been painful but necessary. By walking away from that Thanksgiving table a year ago, I hadn't just been leaving a dinner. I had been taking the first step toward reclaiming myself. "I'd like to make a toast," my mother said, raising her glass, "to finding your voice, standing your ground, and building the family you choose." As glasses clinked around the table, Robert squeezed my hand beneath the tablecloth. "Thank you," he whispered, "for being brave enough to walk away so we could find our way back to each other." Guyang. The road hadn't been easy, and there would undoubtedly be challenges ahead. Martha was making progress in therapy, but decades of established behavior patterns wouldn't change overnight. There would be backsliding, difficult conversations, moments when old dynamics threatened to reassert themselves. But I now had the tools and the confidence to navigate those challenges without losing myself in the process. I had learned that setting boundaries wasn't selfish, but necessary, that walking away sometimes took more courage than staying, and that true love required not just affection, but respect and protection. Most importantly, I had discovered that my worth wasn't determined by Martha's approval or even Robert's love, but by my own sense of self. The journey back to myself had been the most valuable gift of this difficult year. As the evening progressed, filled with genuine laughter and warm conversation, I found myself reflecting on the strange paradox at the heart of my experience. Sometimes you have to walk away from what you love, to find a path back to it on better terms. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to stand up, place your napkin on the table, and say, "Enough." Have you ever had to walk away from someone to protect your dignity? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to choose yourself. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, sometimes walking away isn't the end of the story, but the beginning of a better one.